Take you to the broadcast of It's Time with Rev Nathaniel W Martin. Here's Reverend Martin.
Thank you, Dr. Blackwell. And never good night and never goodbye. Let me also say, wish you a Merry Christmas for next Wednesday. And let me also get to the point and say my name is Rev Nathaniel W Martin. I'm the pastor of the New Life Institutional Baptist Church here in the beautiful city of Los Angeles, California. And we are located at the wonderful area of 8916 South Main Street, which is in the heart of South Central, very, very south of Olympic Boulevard. We welcome you to come and worship with us at all times. Feel free to come to the area. It's very safe. Matter of fact, the area is suffering from gentrification. I use the word suffering because those of us who have always lived there are now getting to the point where, because of gentrification and reclassification of areas, we're becoming like Harlem, and a lot of us are becoming, we just happen to move out. But the church is still there, 8916 South Main. We're worshiping with the Shiloh Missionary Christian Church. My good friend, the Reverend Dr. Della F. Hollaness, is there, and the Baptists and the Charismatics and the Pentecostals. Amen. And the Apostolics, we all get together. I think Brother Pearson says we are the Baptist-Costalists. Anyway, we have a great time on Sunday and on Wednesdays and on Fridays. So on Sundays, beginning at 10 a.m., on Wednesdays at 7 p.m., and again on Fridays at 7 p.m. That we'll be there tonight, as a matter of fact. The title of this offering, however, that we are engaged in right now is entitled, It's Time. And you might well ask, what is it time for? It is time for justice, my friend. As Dr. King said, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. And believe me, it is long overdue. And this justice must involve environmental justice for the savage and the inhumane way that we have polluted this continent, have polluted the earth, and in that polluting, we have marginalized and pinned in for many generations people who are of a different hue, people who have been kissed by the sun, my people who are called the so-called black people here in America, who were once known as the so-called colored people. And I use the adjective modifier so-called in front of the word people because of the fact that there is no such classification as race occurring in nature. And we must begin to eradicate these distinctions of people based upon this false classification. White does not occur in nature, neither does black occur in nature. In the DNA, in the gene pool, in the cell pool, there is no such classification. So these false sciences have brought us to the brink of destruction long enough. And it's time for us to turn, my brothers, turn, my friend, open our eyes. As Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And let us begin to move toward the light and away from this darkness that has, for so many generations, made us suspicious of one another. Let us throw off the deeds of darkness, as the Bible said, and let God cause us to walk in the light. As we are in the Christmas season, let me read the beautiful words of reparation which were found in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 15, beginning at verse 12, which says beautifully, and if thy brother, an Hebrew man, or an Hebrew woman, be sold unto thee, and serve thee 6 years, then in the 7th year thou shalt let him or her go free from thee. And when thou sendest him or her out free from thee, thou shalt not let him or her go away empty. Thou shalt thoroughly furnish him or her liberally out of thy flock, and out of thy floor, and out of thy winepress of that wherewith the Lord thy God hath blessed thee, thou shalt give unto them. Beautiful words. It declares God's opposition to permanent slavery, the categorical imperative of slavery, and it discloses God's opposition to perpetual slavery as it was practiced and as it was refined cruelty. Yes, refined cruelty here in the in the original 13 colonies, and later in the United States, and then following the brutal bloodletting, sanguinary conflict of the Civil War, the United States of America. We went from being the United States are to being the United States is. And one of the most beautiful gifts, Christmas gifts, that we have ever received was the coming of our Savior into this sin-torn, sin-cursed world of ours, and we are struggling and laboring to throw off the works of darkness and walk in the newness of life as the Bible commands us and teaches us. And that means we must adhere to the truth and adhere to the word of God. Out of one blood, God made all men for to dwell upon the face of the earth. Well, we must either believe that, or we must do like our brethren have done and go into that demented dark night in which every category of learning has to be tinged with racism, with white supremacy. But once we say we'll no longer follow that dictate or that dicta or that dictum of white supremacy, and we will walk in the newness of life as God has given it to us, then, my brothers and my sisters, we shall begin to walk toward that new day of which the late Dr. King and all of the great leaders before him and before us who have seen the light have spoken of. I would like you to note the fact that in New Jersey, the governor in New Jersey is passing a law that convicted felons who have served their time will no longer be denied the franchise of voting. Let's see. If I could just find it real quick, I would read it to you, but I can't find it in time, so I move on. But it bears noting. What that means is that people who have been denied the right to vote because of conviction for crime, which was a punishment meted out by the 13th Amendment, which says that slavery or involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereby the party shall have been duly convicted, shall no longer attain or shall no longer exist or shall be abolished. But if you were convicted of a crime, you go back into what Michelle Alexander and all of the legal scholars call a form of slavery. You lose your right to vote, among other things, and you lose so many rights when you go and get yourself in a position to go to jail, go to prison. And that's one reason to stay out of that jail and stay out of the prison, because you become the slave. That's why the man treats you so bad when he tell you to put your hands up or put your hands behind you. And that's why the policemen take the opportunity to just brutalize you, even though you have not yet been convicted of any crime, but you do receive summary justice out there in the street. And I think a lot of the murders that the police commit in arresting people, and then they want to hide behind the officer's state of mind, are done because that police officer, male or female, black or white, they're all the same, feels that they can justify their actions among their peers and their contemporaries by appealing to the 13th Amendment, which deprives one of one's civil rights. And in slavery time, it deprived one of human rights, as Abraham Lincoln said in one of his speeches there, that now the Negro is regarded as a brute. You can read that in one of his speeches. Where the source of it is escaping me at the moment. I'm not going to dwell on it, but you can check it out. And for further reference, remember that the Vice President of the Confederacy, Mr. Alexander M. Stephens, asserted and affirmed and declared most vociferously that the foundation is laid and the cornerstone rests upon the great truth, put that in quotes, great truth, that the natural state of the Negro is one of slavery or subjection to the white people, to the white race, and that slavery is his normal condition and he's best suited for slavery. And so all of those things still figure in the thinking of many people, unfortunately, in the land of the free and the home of the brave. One has to really have a sense of humor when one looks at these incongruities and inconsistencies, if you're a psychology major, that are so prominent in these assertions by this nation. Land of the free, home of the brave, liberty and justice for all, but as Thurgood Marshall said, it fought so hard to deny both liberty and justice to the Negro. So then when we come to the felony disenfranchisement, and that follows you all through jail, all through prison, all through probation, all through parole. But thank God now we find that in many states, not all the states, there's a movement, there's a reform effort to enfranchise people who have served their time. This started under Maxine Waters, and back in 2002, she's a Democrat from California, God bless her, says that the United States is among the most punitive nations in the world when it comes to denying the vote to those who have been convicted of a felony offense. And in several southern states, felony disenfranchisement was implemented as part of a strategy to bar blacks from voting. Conjoint with felony disenfranchisement, these southern states implemented black codes, which established severe penalties for petty crimes and were used to target black Americans. You will remember, of course, the 2000 presidential campaign, which was not won by George Bush, but in which the Supreme Court of the United States appointed and selected George W. Bush as the president, apparent of the as the winner of the 2000 campaign for president of the United States between he and Al Gore. And one of the big salient characteristics and anomalies that surfaced was that when the dust finally settled and they began to really look at the vote in Florida, we found that there had been a huge purge of the voter rolls. And those purged, quite naturally, from the voter rolls were, you guessed it, Black Americans, a Black citizen of Florida, Miss Catherine Harris, who was the Secretary of State and who anointed George W. Bush president, had done a yeoman's job to do her best to make sure that many Black people who were otherwise qualified to vote had been purged from the voter rolls and were not allowed to vote. And you recall that the guy that was recently convicted this year, his name, I believe, is Roger Stone, was very, very active in that stopping the vote there in the state of Florida. And in fact, they've just burst through the doors into the room where the recount was taking place with cameras and with venom and with vigor and with malice and belligerence. They just frightened the so-called counters and the people and the electors who were charged with the constitutional duty to begin that recording. The United States Supreme Court said, stop that counting. And as a result, they said, forget about you, Al Gore. We're giving it to George W. Bush. And God knows what happened after that. You have all been witnesses on both sides of the political spectrum. As the old song says, I've looked at life from both sides now, from in and out and up and down. And surely the bloodletting and the tax cuts and a lot of the suffering that has endured and we're still suffering under or languishing under probably would not have occurred to the degree that it occurred had Al Gore been brave enough to demand that the count be finished in the state of Florida. As a matter of fact, that investigative reporter, I won't try to remember his name, but you know who he was, went down there and found out that there were over 500,000, 175,000 Black people who were eligible to vote that had not been allowed to vote. That Al Gore really actually won in the state of Florida. Like I said, between 175,000, which would put him over the top, to over some 500,000 voters had been purged from the voter rolls there in the state of Florida. So when we come to felony voters, folks who have served their time, then we have various classifications that are being implemented. It says that Maine and Vermont, which are the two whitest states in the nation, please, are the only states with unrestricted voting rights for people who are felons. Both states allow the person to vote during incarceration by an absentee ballot and after terms of conviction end. Again, they are the two whitest bred states in the union, in the nation. The rest of them are struggling to get there. You have 16 states and the District of Columbia. The incarceration, disenfranchisement ends after incarceration is complete. And let's see. In February 2016, the Maryland General Assembly restored the right to vote for more than 40,000 release felons, overriding a veto by Governor Larry Hogan. There you go. The problem is that these GOP-controlled states know that they can hold on to power as long as they can deny the franchise to as many people legitimately as they are able to. And so there's a great deal of voter suppression and the like. So then you got certain many states that after you finish your 16 states, after you get out, you can go back to voting. Here we go. In New Jersey, Governor Phil Murphy has also signed a new law restoring voting rights to anyone under parole or probation starting in March 17, 2020. Isn't that beautiful? Just in time for the June 2020 election. So that means in the state of New Jersey next year, felons who have completed their time and who are no longer on, let me make sure I get this right. Yes, parole or probation will be eligible to vote. That will add to the voting roll. And this is where it gets technical, because in 3 states, you can only vote after parole ends. And guess who's on that list? California, Connecticut, and New York. I'm not reading the long list of other states that have other restrictions. I'm just giving you the total number. 16 states, it ends after release. Let's see now. In 18 states, it ends after probation. 3 states after parole. 16 states, time you get out. 18 states after probation. That means you're under, some supervision from a probation officer, and begin to vote. It says here at the bottom that the prosecutor can request the court to invoke voting rights, to revoke voting rights if financial obligations are unmet. And of course, you know who that impacts. That impacts the poor. We didn't have no money when we went to jail, and you ain't gonna have no money when you come out of the jail. So then how you gonna pay? And in some states, they are requiring you to pay for the time that you were in jail, and you don't have that kind of money. And so they are still permanently blocking people who have done their time, served their time, from voting. And that should be classified as a cruel and unusual punishment, because once you finish your time, that should be it. Now it says that 8 states have laws that relate disenfranchisement to the detail of the crime. And guess who those states are? I can call those because they're shortlisted. Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Mississippi, Nebraska, Tennessee, and Wyoming. And then there are 3 states that require you to petition the court for restoration of voting after all offenses. And amen. As they say, nobody gets hurt by this but black people, because we tend to be on the lowest part of the totem pole, on the bottom economically. And so we continue to deal with the cost and the problem of being able to vote. Remember, if you can't vote, then you really don't have a stake or a say in anything that is occurring in your state, or in your city, or in your county, or in your town. Individual petitions are required in Iowa, Kentucky, and Virginia. Kentucky and Virginia were both slave states, fought with the Confederacy. Not actually fought with, Virginia certainly fought with the Confederacy. Missouri and Kentucky were prevented by the presence of Union troops from joining the Confederacy. They were 2 of the border states, and but notwithstanding, they did their best to aid. Of course, Virginia is the home of Robert E. Lee, and Richmond, Virginia was the seat of the Confederacy. And so you can see from this that I've read about felony disenfranchisement that it has its roots in slavery. I got my 5-minute warning. I wanted to remind you as we get ready to wrap up that Christmas for us is a joyous and a happy time, but in slavery, the slaves, it was a time of great tension and a time of great uncertainty, because it was the end of the year and beginning of the year, end of the year. And so while the people who owned the plantation, these people who enslaved, were quite joyous and happy, because they had the slaves cooking in the kitchen and fixing and cleaning and all of that, and seeming to make merry for them. But remember that a lot of families and people were broken up at the end of the year, because the decision on what slaves were being sold and what slaves were being kept were made now at the end of the year. Just like now in our modern contemporary society, the corporations and the companies and the factories are doing what? They're making up who is going to be let go and what their financial outlook is going to be for the new year. And a lot of people are going to get fired or laid off between now and the first year. Christmas is going to be a tough time for a lot of people in America, just like it was during slavery. That's when slaves found out who was going to be sold and who was going to be sent away. And therefore, there was a great deal of anxiety, because first of the year, January, if you had been sold, you had to be on your way to the new plantation. So Christmas was not a joyful time for slaves because of those grim realities. And believe me, that practice has carried over even to now, with corporations looking at their bottom line and deciding who's going to stay and who's going to be let go. And a lot of people are getting those pink slips and those do not return notices. And this is your last day notice right now. It's a terrible, terrible time for many people. So please let us be mindful of our brothers and our sisters who are laboring and who are toiling and who are under great stress and distress, and who are even depressed by this turn of events. Who wants to know that this is the last Christmas and I'm working, that I won't have a job January 1st? Isn't that depressing? You got all these bills from Christmas. As the folks said in the song, it take the next 6 months to pay these bills. Every time I think about it, it gives me chills. And suppose you were that father or that mother, and you're looking at those children, and you're wondering, how in the world I'm going to pay these bills? I don't have the money. How are we going to make rent? How are we going to make groceries? How are we going to keep them in school? Lord help us. We have a terrible, terrible economy, a terrible, terrible capitalistic system that just cannibalizes and commodifies you and me. So as we celebrate Christmas, let's remember to keep Jesus Christ in Christmas. Forget about this Santa Claus BS and serve the Lord. Remember, I tell you now, with all these rich people enjoying their Christmas, these billionaires, these trillionaires, these millionaires, and then the poor folks like us, if they don't want to pay you on these jobs, I tell you now, as I've always told you before, get you a sideline, get you a business of your own, because if they don't want to pay you, don't work for them. God bless you, Doc. Thank you very much.
Outweigh my bad days, yes they do. Outweigh my bad days. I just say thank you, Lord.